We have made it to the series finale of the Miami Marlins franchise here on MLB The Show 23. Today is our long-term simulation, and we will go as long as we need until everybody from the core has retired. Before we get started, man, what a journey it has been with this team, and I feel like this is definitely the best MLB The Show series I've had on this channel, and really one of the best series and one of my favorite series that we've had, period. I mean, this series was really influential for this channel. I really wanted to sort of change things up with the style a little bit and go through more seasons, and we were able to get through 8 years with this team. We also introduced the studs and duds of the year, which is carried over into my football and basketball series as well, and it was really fun going through multiple different roster cores with this team, and of course, now having won our second World Series championship of the franchise. And today we're going to find out what happens in all of these guys' careers, and it should be really interesting to follow. We'll start with Edward Cabrera, who of course has won 4 consecutive Cy Youngs. We'll see if he can go for the record of 5 in a row. Jazz Chisholm, who's been one of the faces of this team, will he continue to have a great career? Woody Landry, our top draft pick. We got to have him for 6 whole seasons in the series, which is a lot for a drafted player. Will he become a Hall of Famer? What about Isaac Stu, who we got to have over the last 4 seasons as well? What about, say, Brian De La Cruz in the outfield, who's turned into a late bloomer, having, of course, just won the MVP? And it's not just those guys, of course, it's everybody else as well. We're going to find out what happens to all of these players through the rest of their major league careers. We're going to format the long-term simulation a little bit differently. In the past, I've split it up into multiple episodes. Obviously, we're not doing that today. We're doing it all in one. And what I used to do is I used to control the roster, make all of the roster moves, and keep these guys on the team until they were literally as frail as possible. But we're going to do things a little bit different and keep all of the roster settings on automatic. That way it's going to feel more organic, in my opinion, and we're really going to see what MLB The Show believes is going to happen in all of these guys' careers over the coming years and even decades. Our last order of business before we get into the first offseason is our final studs and duds for the postseason. And since we won the World Series, nobody was disappointing. So we're going to pick 3 players to go up in rating by 1. Again, we're obviously not doing this during the long-term sim years. Otherwise, we would be here all day. But I did want to get one more in for our playoff run. And we're going to start with Jacob Berry, who was our best player during the postseason. This was a pretty easy choice. He'll go up by 1. He's now an 85 overall. One of the great things about going through 7 and 8 seasons is we got to see guys such as Jacob Berry finally break out into the player that we thought he would become. Brian De La Cruz was another example of this, and of course, he was injured during the playoffs. We needed our outfielders to step up, and man, did James Wood come up big. He broke out in the regular season, we gave him the big contract extension, and he was even better in the postseason. He's now got 8 potential, he's an 89 overall, and I'm really excited about his future. Our third and final guy is going to be the rookie pitcher, Geronimo Gonzalez, who won the National League Rookie of the Year. He was really good in every playoff game he pitched in, including Game 4, the elimination game of the World Series. He'll go up by 1. Super excited about what he could become in the future in our rotation. His ceiling is a lot higher than I thought it was when we traded for him. So with that, we can start simulating, and we will enter our first offseason of the series. Going through retirements, we're going to recap every notable player who we see who has to do with the series in the retirement stage. No one makes the Hall of Fame. So I know I said I was going to keep everything on automatic, but we're going to cheat a little bit. There are a few guys who we're going to keep around no matter what. Edward Cabrera, Woody Landry, Isaac Stu, Brian De La Cruz, and Jazz Chisholm. Those are the 5 best players in the series, in my opinion. We're not going to let those guys go. This is what the team looks like for 2031. Casey Mize ended up signing with the Cardinals, and we added Josh Young as a bench bat and somebody who can play lefties. So let's simulate here to the end of the year. Now, I only decided to simulate up to the All-Star break. Normally, I'm going to simulate straight to the end of the season. But I did want to talk about something here at the All-Star break. I'm not sure if you guys remember during the final couple of seasons of the series, Edward Cabrera started to regress, and I didn't let the game do it. But it's for long-term sim. I'm going to let the game do what it wants. And, yeah, Edward Cabrera's fallen. And his numbers have certainly taken a hit. Only a .4 WAR, 4.20 ERA. But he's still in first place for the Cy Young. And Gonzalez is in third. I don't know how that's possible. Cabrera has not been all that good this year. But, okay, I'm not complaining. Cabrera might break the record even without playing all that well. At the end of the year, we end up winning 92 games, certainly a downgrade from last year, but still certainly quite strong. Our least winning season in 5 years, but we still end up getting the number 1 seed in the National League. Taking a look at the team's stats for the year, Isaac Stewart, a brilliant season. Brian De La Cruz picked off where he left off from last year. His MVP season, not a fluke. Khalil Watson really broke out. It's good to see him finally turning into a full-time starter and a really, really good player for us. Woody Landry was not there. He is on the 60-day injured list, unfortunately, but he should be back pretty soon, and he had a pretty solid year when healthy. As for the pitching, Cabrera's numbers fell even harder. He goes down 11 rating points and had an ERA of nearly 5. As you can imagine, he did not win the Cy Young, but he did finish in 3rd. Taylor Dollard wins it, and Ray Castro, whose ERA was also in the 4s, gets 2nd. Dollard is a 32-year-old with C potential who really has no business being here, and he started 1 game the entire year. Does nobody deserve the Cy Young at all for a guy with 1 start to win it and a guy with an ERA in the 5s to get 3rd? Emmanuel Clase, by the way, I do want to talk about him. He's a free agent. He had a great year. At first, when he signed the contract, I felt like he wasn't really worth it, but I feel like he's really rebounded. So now in the playoffs, we're going up against the Giants, one of the teams in contention for my MLB 24 team, and unfortunately, they end up beating us in the NLDS. The Rangers would win the World Series after losing last year. They beat the Cubs. So the Cubs finally get to avoid us in the playoffs, and sure enough, they make it all the way to the World Series. Justin Kramer with a big playoff run. I'm really curious to see how his career goes, being that he's basically the Mike Trout of this generation. Looking at the retirements, a few former Marlins, including Luis Severino, who was only here 1 season, but he was really solid as a middle starter in our first championship season. And then, of course, it's time for Paul Sewald to pitch. We had him for 2 years as Mike Trout makes the Hall of Fame as a White Sox, and Jose Altuve makes it as a Cleveland Guardian. That's going to bring us into free agency, and we've got a lot of guys to pay. Now, again, we're going to keep it on automatic other than a few players, such as Edward Cabrera, but everybody else, it's up to the game. Clase, Melendez, Brujan, Berry, Duvall. A lot of key faces from the core of this series. It's ultimately a pretty good free agency class. I imagine we're going to lose some guys. Yuri Perez, the former Marlin, ends up in Seattle, 4 years for $60 million. Emmanuel Clase is gone. A great 4-year run with him. He's going to go to the Baltimore Orioles. Jesus Sanchez had a player option. He declines it, and he's going to sign with the Milwaukee Brewers. This one hurts. Jesus Sanchez has been here since day 1. We got 9 really good seasons out of him, though, and he developed into a great player, and he's still got some good years left, and he's going to get a chance to shine with his former Marlins teammate, Luis Robert, in Milwaukee. Jacob Berry as well signed with the Mariners. I didn't realize this until the following season, so those are his 2032 stats. But Berry is now the 3rd baseman in Seattle. We did bring back MJ Melendez, though, which I think is a big win. Melendez has been great over the last 4 years. He had his best year with us last year, and I don't think he's really showing any signs of slowing down. So that's going to bring us into the 10th season of the series, the 2nd season of the long-term sim. We lost a lot of our good buddies with Clase, Sanchez, Berry. Those guys are all gone. Camilo Duvall as well. We did add Nick Sandlin to the bullpen, and I think he's going to pair pretty well with Jimenez and Shearer. So, again, normally I would simulate to the end of the year, but there were some interesting stuff I wanted to go over real quick at the All-Star break. Edward Cabrera is continuing to regress hard. He is an 82 overall, no longer in the Cy Young race. But what really caught my eye was this. Jesus Sanchez is the MVP leader at the All-Star break. I'm going to choose not to be salty and instead take the high road and be happy for our guy that he is succeeding in Milwaukee. But why couldn't he hit 330 on our team? We end up winning 96 games. I'm pretty sure that's good enough for the number 1 seed in the National League and hopefully another opportunity to chase ring number 3. Ariel Amador finally had a really good season with us. Could this be a sign of things to come if we end up picking the Rockies for MLB The Show 24? Ziggy Zadane played a lot, and he was really good, probably our 2nd best outfielder. Brian De La Cruz is showing some signs of regression. He's still really good, but the average went down quite a bit. James Wood was kind of disappointing. He's been a little underwhelming since signing the extension. And then here's the pitching. Edward Cabrera's transitioned into a little bit of a line relief role, and he actually did really well there. We're going to play the Mets in the NLDS, another postseason battle with New York, and we beat them in 4. Why does it feel like every playoff series against the Mets, there's a game where some team scores like 15 runs? Now we've got the Diamondbacks in the NLCS. We're up 3-2, and we're going to the World Series, facing off against the Houston Astros, who still have a lot of familiar faces. Yordan Alvarez, Jeremy Pena, Christian Javier, Kyle Lewis. Those guys are all still here. They also still have Forrest Whitley as we take the first two. Close series, tied at 2. We lose Game 5, and we lose in 6. So unfortunately, we lose the World Series to the Houston Astros. De La Cruz, Melendez, and Stu, the top 3 for postseason MVP. Not really a surprise. Those guys always do very well in the playoffs. As that brings us into the offseason, no new retirements from our organization, but we do have some familiar faces, including Reynaldo Lopez, who we had on the team for 5 years, including our first World Series title in 2028. He only played 5 games after that, but he was a really solid reliever for a long time with us. Shohei Ohtani retiring as well. Obviously, he wasn't on our team, but it's still notable. Ohtani's retiring his old age, the same year that Kodai Senga is. And the reason why this is relevant is because Senga was a rookie when this series started. He's retiring the same year as Joey Votto. Joey Votto is such a troll. He sticks around until he's 49, and he finally retires. No Hall of Fame for Votto or Shohei, which is wild. But Trey Turner does make it, retiring as a Philadelphia Philly. Going into the offseason, we've got 2 guys who I consider to be Marlin lifers with Jazz Chisholm and Brian De La Cruz. I am not letting them go anywhere. Both of these guys have earned the opportunity to retire as Miami Marlins. Both of those guys would end up accepting. Max Meyer, former Marlin, signs a nice contract with the Cubs. He's pitched against Chicago multiple times in the playoffs with interesting results. So now he joins the Cubs as we hop into the 3rd season of the day. Pretty similar lineup, although we added Kyle Isbell and Kyle Tucker for the bench. The pitching rotation looks a lot different now. A lot of young guys like Wade Rockwell and Hitoki Nomo now in there as we win 102 games, number 1 seed. I'm not surprised that the team is still doing really well, being that most of our core is still intact. Ziggy Zidane has been great for us over the last 2 years. He looks like he can be a real piece for us in the outfield long term. Stu, Landry, and De La Cruz were all kind of meh. De La Cruz is getting worse. I'm not too worried about the other 2 guys, though. Jazz Chisholm and Kevin Alcantara both on the 60-day injured list. Jazz Chisholm is really starting to regress pretty fast, and Kevin Alcantara is losing some juice as well. Alcantara had a good season last year, but this year not so much. The pitching was pretty solid. Robbie Jones and Geronimo Gonzalez have continued to produce. Edward Cabrera was also pretty good in around 100 innings, so he is still an impactful Major League player. As we're playing against the Mets again for the 20,000th time in the playoffs. We're up in the series 2-1. We lose Game 4, and we win Game 5. We've got the Reds in the NLCS. I've never played against Cincinnati in a playoff series as we lose the second game 10-0, tied at 1. We take 2 of 3 in Cincy, and we're back to the World Series now against the Seattle Mariners, who have been good for a little while. They've still got Dave Carlson and Roki Sasaki leading the way in for the rotation, along with Yuri Perez. They've got Ronald Acuna leading the way. Julio Rodriguez is not on the postseason roster, though. Even though he's only 32 years old, he has regressed quite a bit. And of course, the Mariners also have Jacob Berry, who is hitting .421 in the postseason. That might be the least surprising thing ever. So do the Marlins get ring number 3, or will it be Jacob Berry as we win the first and the second? We're off to a good start. We take Game 3, we're up 3-0, but we lose Game 4 and Game 5 and Game 6. Guys, do not blow a 3-0 lead. Yuri Perez on the mound for the Mariners, and thank God we end up winning in 7. Tyrell Berry was the starting pitcher. And there you go. The Marlins have won World Series number 3, beating former Marlin Yuri Perez on the mound. It took us 7 games after we were up 3-0, but we'll take it as we now win our 3rd championship of the series. Peter Gillis wins the World Series MVP, while Woody Landry takes home the postseason MVP, followed by Ariel Amador and MJ Melendez. So overall, a pretty successful first 3 seasons of the Sim. 2 World Series appearances, 1 World Series win. As we enter another offseason, finally with a retirement, but it's not someone relevant to the series. It is Caleb Hamilton. We do have some other notable players retiring, including Tarek Skubal, who retires with a torn rotator cuff. We had him for half a year in 2026. Didn't really work out, but he had some good seasons with the Tigers, Cleveland, and the Rays. Josh Bell retires. He was on our World Series team in 2028. Never played after that, so he finished off as a champion. Jordan Hicks retires as well. He was a really good reliever for us for 5 seasons. It ultimately tailed off that last year, but he was really solid. And again, another guy who we might see in the future, being that he is on the San Francisco Giants. Ha-Seong Kim retires. We had him for 1 year in Season 5. He bounced around a little bit after that with Atlanta and Cleveland over the next 2 years. Johnny Lundy, he was a draft pick of ours in Season 1. We've made it far enough to where our draft picks are retiring. He only played with the Colorado Rockies. Again, possibly foreshadowing for MLB The Show 24. Casey Mize retires at the age of 36. Mize was a really solid pitcher for us for 3 years, and then he spent time with the Cardinals over the next 2 years. I feel like the Cardinals and the Brewers are the two teams who always poach the players who leave our teams. I don't know why, especially the Cardinals. That brings us into another offseason with a lot of big free agents. Joe Shearer, Tyrell Berry, Khalil Watson, Edward Cabrera, who's obviously going to come back. Joe Shearer leaves for the Nationals. That's a big one. I was really hoping that we would pay Joe Shearer. He's been one of the best relievers in baseball for quite a while now. Tyrell Berry signs with the Athletics. He's a good player, but I'm a little bit more concerned about the loss of Joe Shearer. Nonetheless, Berry's a solid rotation arm, and he's a good addition for the A's. Ronald Andino claimed off of waivers, again involving the Colorado Rockies. Andino, of course, a former first-round pick of ours. Curious to see what he does. And then Khalil Watson, who's been really good over the last couple of seasons, signs a 4-year deal with the Chicago White Sox. So now we're in the 4th season of the long-term sim, and the core is starting to look a lot different. We've still got our main guys with Jazz, Woody, Stu, De La Cruz, Cabrera, but the rest of the roster looks a lot different, and pretty much half of our team from the 2030 World Series roster, if not more, is gone. The roster looks a whole lot different. We're still the number 1 ranked team in the game, but I feel like we have lost some luster, being that we haven't really spent a whole lot of money, and we've lost a ton of key players in the lineup and in the rotation. Our pitching rotation is damn near unrecognizable at this point. All of those guys weren't really full starters for us until 2030, which was the final season of the actual series. Let's simulate to the end of the season now as we win 102 games once again. Good enough for the number 1 seed. In terms of notable performers, Woody Landry had a really good season. He's been in the league 10 years. This is where he would start to regress. So far, it hasn't happened yet, which is good. Young guys like Johnny Henderson are really starting to make some noise. Isaac Stu and Brian De La Cruz are both injured. Stu was really good, though. I'm pretty sure he actually won the NL MVP. De La Cruz, meanwhile, has really started to fall off. He is 37 years old. It's understandable, but it looks like he's not the same player he once was. As for the pitching, Matt Griggs, the lefty, was probably our best pitcher this year. As for Edward Cabrera, again, he was pretty solid in the bullpen, nothing spectacular. He has gone down all the way to a 69 overall. I thought Isaac Stu won the MVP. He actually finished 3rd. Woody Landry got 2nd. And this 21-year-old Shane Herzog ends up winning. Matt Griggs, meanwhile, 2nd for Cy Young. We're going to go up against the Mets again. A 3rd straight meeting with them in the NLDS. And just like the first 2, we beat them. Now we've got the Marlins of the West, the St. Louis Cardinals, 3-2, and we win Game 6. Back to the World Series again, facing off against the Chicago White Sox, led by Jackson Holliday, Day Swinson. They've got Wander Franco. I'm getting flashbacks from Season 5, where he hit the big home run in Game 7. Khalil Watson is kind of in a crowded infield here with Franco and Holliday, but of course Khalil Watson is here as well as we win the first 3. No funny business this time. Okay, good. We sweep them. And the Marlins win World Series number 4, our 2nd in a row, and our 4th of the last 7 years. Woody Landry wins the World Series and postseason MVP. And with that, I think it's pretty fair to say that this team, if they were not already, is officially a dynasty. Even though the roster has changed a lot over the 4 years of the long-term simulation, we've still been able to maintain the absolute core guys as we enter another offseason. John Kennedy retires, if you know, you know, when he was with the Nationals. Sandy Alcantara retires, along with former Marlins prospect Ishmael Alcantara. So Sandy Sori is certainly an interesting one, being that he was one of the big faces on this team when we started this series as the A's coming off his Cy Young in 2022. And he was really good. He was the ace of the staff the first 3 years. Season 4 was the turning point for him, though. That's when Edward Cabrera passed him as the best pitcher on the staff. Season 5, he rebounded, though, in a big way. However, throughout his entire Marlins career, he wasn't all that good in the playoffs. Season 5 in particular, that was the year we lost the World Series to the Rays. He started in Game 6 of the World Series when we were up 3-2. Of course, he took a comebacker off the leg on the first at bat of the game. He was able to pitch in Game 7. He blew that game. and we ended up letting him go. Although I wanted to bring him back at the time, but I think letting him go was ultimately the best decision. He ended up with the Yankees. He was pretty solid there, but he wasn't necessarily the player he once was. Still a great career for Sandy Alcantara. It's a shame that we couldn't win a championship with him on the roster. So by that definition, you could argue he was a little bit of a disappointment for the sake of the series, but overall, a phenomenal player nonetheless. I'm curious to see if he has any chance for the Hall of Fame. WAR of around 50, close to 3,000 innings, career ERA a little bit above 3. I think there's an argument. Jonathan Loaisiga, Gavin Lux, Aurelvis Martinez, Reese McGuire all retire. We'll talk about Aurelvis Martinez here. He was always a good player when he got an opportunity. I feel like he never really got a fair chance, though. I wish we gave him a bigger opportunity. He had some good seasons, especially 2030 with Detroit, but he was really bad the next year, never really played after that. Gavin Lux, we traded for him at the Season 2 deadline, and in Seasons 2 and 3, he was really good. Season 4, he took a step back, though. Injuries also were kind of the hindrance on him. We let him go to the Cardinals, where he was really good for quite a while. Letting him go was probably one of the few mistakes we made. Anthony Santander also retires. We had him for a season and a half. Tony Taters, of course, big-time masher. A lot of home runs throughout his major league career. So a pretty lengthy list here of retirements, and it's going to get bigger and bigger as the episode goes on, as that brings us to the 2034 offseason. Robbie Jones is a free agent. He is coming off a really good season. I think it would be a major mistake to let him walk. Jazz Chisholm's obviously a guy we're going to pay long-term. James Wood is here as well. His contract extension is over. I feel like he was a disappointment during his contract. We're not going to pick up his team option. Robbie Jones signs for 9 years and $200 in Seattle. Get your bag, King. I wish it could have been from us, but instead he joins one of the best teams in the American League. Andres Vina joins him in the AL West, signing with the Rangers. Vina gets a 5-year deal from Texas, so one of our stalwarts in the bullpen is now gone, unfortunately. Some other offseason moves include this one. Pedro Chavez, an outfielder, signs a 7-year, $200 million deal with the Marlins. I'm really surprised to see the CPU spending. Chavez was a super highly regarded prospect with the Royals. He's been a really good player for quite a while, and I think this is a really strong pickup. I love that we're spending. I would have rather used that money on Robbie Jones, but I can't complain. Pedro Chavez is an awesome player. That brings us to the 2035 season with a new addition on offense. Woody Landry has made it to the 10th and final season of the big contract he signed after his rookie year. He hasn't really gotten too much worse. We're definitely going to look to extend him, but I'm going to do it later in case he starts to regress now that he's at 10 years of MLB service. So here we are in 2035. No longer the highest ranked team in the game. We have fallen to 3rd. This is what the lineup looks like with the addition of Pedro Chavez. Overall, still a really talented group on offense, even though most of our core is gone. We did re-sign Idael Amador in the offseason, so he's back. And then here's the pitching. Again, looks so much different than what it was at the start of today's episode. So we're going to make it here close to the trade deadline. I want to talk contract regarding with Woody Landry because obviously he's a guy who needs to stick with the Marlins for his entire career. He hasn't really regressed this year, which is a good sign that we're going to get a few more years out of him in his prime. So now's a good time to pay him. We're going to look to give him around 4 years for 111, and he accepts. So Woody Landry is back as we win 102 games again. I think we've got the same record 3 years in a row. The last 2 times we won the World Series, but we're not the number 1 seed this year. The Colorado Rockies won 111 games, so I'm a little bit worried. Here's a look at the numbers. Great year for Woody. Stu was solid. Pedro Chavez was a little disappointing, though, being how good he is. We've got a ton of injuries here. Holy hell. Johnny Henderson's going to be a big loss with a torn MCL. Peter Gillis is out. Brian De La Cruz tore his Achilles. Being that he's 38 years old, I wonder, could this be the end of the road for him? Players do retire once they're older off of injuries. Geronimo Gonzalez won the Cy Young pitching-wise. He has lived up to the hype and then some. Edward Cabrera, meanwhile, is completely cooked. I hate to say it, but it looks like it's Edward Cabrera over. We're going to play against the Mets in the NLDS again. 4 years in a row. Can the Mets finally beat us? No, of course not. We own the Mets. Now we're going up against the Rockies. This team won 111 games. I wanted to see how good they were. And yeah, this team is loaded. No wonder they won 111 games. Their lineup is ridiculous. Their pitching isn't as good, but it's the Rockies. They can just hit dingers at cores, and we end up getting swept by them. The Rangers beat the Rockies, though, in the World Series. I would have thought Colorado would have ran the table, but instead Texas gets the job done. They've got some new faces here with Ellie De La Cruz, Marco Luciano, Spencer Torkelson. Justin Kramer's on the last year of his contract, coming off a 12-WAR season. He's going to make some absolute bank this offseason. For the Rangers' sake, hopefully it's them. Here's a look at the retirements here for this next season. In terms of notable players, Ryan Poles, another former draft pick, retires at 33. He got a small opportunity with us, never really was all that spectacular, fell all the way to a 45 overall. Luis Arraez retires. We had him for the first 4 years in this series. Luis Arraez was a really fun player to have because he really changed his game when he was on our team. He really developed a lot of pop in the bat. Ended up signing with the Cubs. We let him go after 2026. We played and beat him a lot in the postseason. Never hit over 300 with the Cubs. He was always a good player in Chicago, but never really the same. Bo Bichette retires. We only had him for 2 seasons, but 2 really good ones. And Bo Bichette's an interesting case because after season 3, there wasn't really a market for him in free agency. I wanted to take a shot on him. After that first season, we had a player option with him. I expected that he was going to decline it, and we were going to give him a big extension. He ended up accepting it. And I still always assumed we were going to extend him. But that 2027 playoff run, he really wasn't all that good. He was bad at the second half of the year. So we let him walk. He signed with the Cardinals, where he was really good for a long time. This looks like a Hall of Fame career from Bo Bichette. And he might be our first Hall of Famer of the series. Camilo Doval retires as well. It's been really fun having Doval over the last 2 years with the Guardians franchise last year and now here with the Marlins franchise. A really, really consistent bullpen arm for us. He was never the closer for the most part, but he was always a really good late innings guy who had a couple up and down seasons, but for the most part, he was really good. Very solid in the postseason. Had some good years late in his career with Minnesota and Pittsburgh. And who knows, maybe we're going to run it back with him for a 3rd straight year. Again, of course, if we pick the Giants for MLB 24. Aaron Sabato retires as well. I feel like we should have given him more of a chance as well. I feel like he had a fun skill set. Tanner Scott and former Marlins first-round pick Connor Scott retire. We traded Tanner Scott at the Season 1 trade deadline for Kevin Alcantara. That trade ended up being a major win for us, although Tanner Scott had some really good seasons. Bo Bichette, Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, and Nolan Arenado all into the Hall of Fame. Bo Bichette is our first Hall of Famer, even though we probably shouldn't really claim him. We only had him for 2 seasons and 0 championships, but he was on our team nonetheless. Going into the offseason, Geronimo Gonzalez is a free agent. I really hope they pay him. He's coming off a Cy Young. He has been as good as advertised and then some. He has absolutely met the hype I had for him coming into the day. Kevin Alcantara's contract extension is over. I can't help but feel like he was a little bit of a disappointment after we signed him after that great 2028 season. He had some good seasons, and his contract wasn't all that expensive, but I expected more. MJ Melendez has fallen off a cliff ratings-wise. He still is playing pretty well, but he's all the way down as a 70. Geronimo Gonzalez signs with the Pirates. 5 years, 68. That is a bargain. I would have been happy to give him double that. But, unfortunately, he's gone. After 2 seasons with the Nationals, Joe Shearer has been traded to the Chicago White Sox. That's interesting. The White Sox are one of the better teams in the American League, but he's now out of our division. We're now the 2nd best team in the league here in 2036? 2037? I don't know. I've lost count. The lineup certainly looks a lot different. Other than Woody Landry, Isaac Stu, Jazz Chisholm, Adael Amador, and Kevin Alcantara, all those guys are new. The pitching rotation is pretty much entirely new. Most of those guys were already in the system at the end of the series, but they weren't on the big league team. So we're going to simulate here to the end of the year. Before that, though, MJ Melendez did not end up getting picked up, so I'm going to cheat a little bit and bring him back. Tyrell Berry is traded from the Athletics to the Orioles. That's an interesting one, so he is going to join Baltimore. We ended up going 82-80, but we won the division because the NL East sucks. We beat the Mets out right at the end. I simulated too far. We don't get to see the season stats. But Isaac Stu won the MVP. Beat the Giants in the wild card round. Now against the Rockies here in the NLDS. And we lose. I'm surprised we took them to 5, to be honest, as they lose the World Series again, this time to Minnesota. That brings us into the offseason with a lot of guys retiring. None of these guys were relevant in the series, though. I think Yeson Santana was the only one who I brought into the farm system. In terms of other notable retirements, Alec Bohm calls it a career. We had him for 2 seasons in year 5 and 6. Season 5, he was awesome. Had a career year. Season 6, though, he was not good. He did win a championship that year and had some good seasons afterwards with the Mets. Phil Bickford retires. We only had him for a short bit in Season 6 when we won the World Series, but he was really good. Emmanuel Clase retires. One of the best relief pitchers of this generation, was great in Cleveland, Baltimore, and Miami, my 3 most recent MLB The Show teams. We gave Clase a big deal going into 2028. I felt like it was a little bit risky, but really over those last couple of seasons, I really feel like he played his worth for that contract. Luis Rengifo, another guy who we had on our first championship team, retires. We got him at the deadline that year to mash lefties. He had some good seasons afterwards with the Dodgers, hit over 300 multiple times with the Dodgers, and maybe we'll see him again if we pick the Angels in MLB 24. Sixto Sanchez retires. We had him on the original roster for 3 years, traded him away to the Rays. I'm pretty sure in the Joe Shearer deal. So that trade ended up being a major win for us. One of the most underrated deals of the entire series. No Hall of Famers in 2036. Isaac Stew's 8 or 9 year extension, however long we signed him for, that deal is up. Again, he is going to be a Marlin lifer. We're going to make sure he doesn't go anywhere. Jazz Chisholm and Brian De La Cruz are here as well. We're going to make sure those guys come back, even though both of them really are not all that good anymore. So let's simulate through free agency as Tobias Starr ends up signing with the San Francisco Giants. Really solid relief pitcher for a while. And that's really the only super notable thing that happened as we now enter 2037. The lineup and rotation continuing to look more different and different. There's really only 4 or 5 guys on the Major League team who were here originally. We had a really good rebound season, though, winning 100 games, second best record in the National League. Isaac Stew and Woody Landry were really good. Those are the only guys left, believe it or not, in the lineup. Jazz Chisholm has regressed to the minor leagues. Adael Amador is gone. Kevin Alcantara is gone. And the only guy left in terms of the pitching is Adolfo Jimenez. Only 3 guys from the Rangers World Series championship run are still on the Major League team. We end up beating the Brewers in 4 in the NLDS. Now against the Pirates, who got the number 1 seed. We're in a little trouble here, and we lose in 6 as Pittsburgh ends up beating Boston in the World Series. The Red Sox unable to win the big one. Can we fix that in MLB 24 if we pick Boston? So that's going to bring us into another offseason here. Let's take a look at the retiring players as we've got some more interesting names here, and we will start things off with Cameron Norman, who was a draft pick of ours in Season 1. Traded him away to the Tigers, I think in the deal for Tarek Skubal. Might be wrong about that, but he was really consistent and really solid with them. Nothing special, but certainly not a bad player. Vidal Brujan retires. We traded for him in Season 7. He was on our Season 8 World Series team that beat the Rangers. He was definitely a late bloomer, but he had some good seasons with us and then some good seasons afterwards with the New York Mets, including multiple NLDS losses against the Marlins. Jesus Luzardo retires. We had him for the first 3.5 years of the series. Health was always an issue with him. He also wasn't the most consistent. Traded him to the Dodgers, where he had a couple really good seasons there, but never really lived up to the hype. AJ Puck is a guy who did live up to it, though. We had him for 4 years. Started off slowly, but he was really good after that. Had some great seasons in Boston and St. Louis and Houston. He never really got worse. He was a great player his entire Major League career, and I kind of wish we kept him. I definitely wish we held on to Adonis Stakadopoulos. Letting him go was a big mistake. He was always inconsistent with us. We used him in the trade package to get MJ Melendez, which was obviously a good trade because Melendez has been fantastic. But we should have let someone else go instead of Takadopoulos because he had a fantastic Major League career, most notably with the Orioles and the Dodgers, as Rafael Devers makes the Hall of Fame. Can we do that in MLB 24 if we pick the Red Sox? Who knows? That's going to bring us into the offseason of 2038, I think. Maybe 2037. Yeah, 2037. I've, again, lost count. Numbers are hard. Here's a look at the free agents here. Apparently, O'Neal Cruz is on the team now. That's something. Jesus Sanchez is in free agency as well. He's a 61 overall. I figured, why not just let him chill in the minors as long as he wants? Hitoki Nomo signs a 6-year, $100 million contract with the Royals. I feel like we get a new ace every year because our previous ace leaves in free agency. Johnny Henderson signs a big deal with the Texas Rangers. The Rangers, by the way, did re-sign Justin Kramer after their World Series run, so he's going to be a Ranger probably for the rest of his career, which means the Rangers are always going to be pretty good. That'll bring us into 2038. We are now the 11th ranked team in the game. What a fall off from grace for this team. The lineup certainly looks different, more year by year, as is the rotation. And the team is looking pretty much unrecognizable for the most part. Again, there's only 4 guys from the team who beat the Rangers in the World Series in 2030 who are still on the Major League team. We won 85 games and again sneak into the playoffs as a 6th seed. And you'll never guess who we're playing against in the first round. Isaac Stu won his 2nd MVP. Pretty exciting for him. Believe it or not, he is the first multi-time MVP winner. Jazz, Cabrera, and De La Cruz only won it once, and Woody has never won it. It also looks like Woody is starting to regress for the first time in his career, which, to be honest, the fact that it took him 14 years is kind of a win. First time in his career his OPS was below 800. I think he's going to be better than that and still be a productive player, but he is going to be getting worse. This might be the beginning of the end. So we're playing against the Mets, shocker, and believe it or not, the Mets actually beat us. And not only that, they win the World Series, beating the Red Sox as we go into the offseason and bang, our first big retirement. Jazz Chisholm tore his ACL in the minor leagues, and his career is done at age 41. Going into this series, along with Sandy, Jazz Chisholm was one of the big faces of this team, and he did not disappoint. He had some great seasons for us. Season 3, won the MVP, had a WAR above 10. One of the best individual seasons for any player on any team in this series. Season 6 was certainly his next best year, and other than that, he was overall really good. Had some strong seasons in the long-term sim, finishing with exactly 400 home runs. And overall, just a great, great player. Absolutely lived up to the hype going into this series. He didn't have enough counting stats to be a Hall of Famer, unfortunately, but still a great career and without a doubt a channel legend. Yippee Cape, former Marlins prospect, retires. Fernando Cortez and Luca De La Cruz, more former Marlins prospect, retires. Wander Franco is gone. Pack watch, baby. Max Meyer retires. He certainly had an interesting career, I think would be the right word. Meyer, of course, was a super high draft pick, had Tommy John, and we first saw him in 2024, and he was with our team for a while after that. He was never a full-time starter, though, but we did give him some starts in some big playoff games, and we saw some good and we saw some bad. Certainly a healthy mix. He spent time afterwards with Milwaukee, where he suffered a big injury his first year. He was with the Cubs. His last year, believe it or not, was probably the best year of his entire career, highest WAR. So overall, very strong career. Luis Robert retires as well at the age of 41. We had Robert for 2.5 seasons, trading for him at the year 3 deadline, had him until season 5. Health was always the issue for Robert, but he was a good player for us. Then he signed the big 7-year deal with Milwaukee. Very productive career for Luis Robert. As Yordan Alvarez goes into the Hall of Fame, no Jazz Chisholm, unfortunately, but unsurprising as well. That brings us into another offseason. Wade Rockwell and Adolfo Jimenez are the big free agents here. Brian De La Cruz as well. We're going to make sure we bring him back. So the game actually re-signed somebody who's good, believe it or not. Adolfo Jimenez on a 6-year deal. I think that's a pretty team-friendly contract. Augustin De La Cruz is here, and I know, again, it might be cheating a little bit, but I really want to have De La Cruz play at least 1 year here. If you remember, I really wanted to draft him. Unfortunately, the Royals scooped him up. He has been awesome with the Royals and mainly the Giants. His career stats are online with Woody Landry and Isaac Stu. So I just want to have him for at least 1 year, or 3, which is what we're going to pay him for, and $69 million. Nice. So Gus is finally a Marlin. It's only 15 years too late, but better late than never. Wade Rockwell signs with the Cubs. Tyrell Berry's 5-year deal is up. He is back in the National League East as he signs with the Phillies, who have been mostly irrelevant during the long-term sim. It's really been only us and the Mets. So this is what the lineup and the rotation looks like now in the year 2039. We go 90-72. We don't win the division, and we get to play against the Rockies, who still very much scare me, in the first round of the playoffs. Gus had a pretty solid year, but he's not the player he once was. Woody Landry is continuing to regress. He is now an 89 overall. I'm curious to see if he can hit some big milestones. 3,000 hits, 500 to 600 home runs, and then here are the stats for the pitching. So let's see how we can do here against Colorado, and we get swept. That was fast. The Twins end up winning the World Series, and that brings us into another offseason and another group of retirements. In terms of notable players here, Joe Mack retires with an injury. Former Marlins prospect. Had some good years with the Phillies. but was never a full-time starter. Trevor Rogers ends up retiring. He, of course, was part of the Luis Robert trade package in Season 3. He just never really panned out here. Injuries was an issue. Consistency was an issue. And ultimately, that trade ended up being a big win. Although, Trevor Rogers had some good seasons in Baltimore, but again, was just never all that consistent. Nonetheless, pretty solid player for quite a while, as Juan Soto ends up making the Hall of Fame here in 2039. Woody Landry's recent contract is up. He wants not a lot of money, which is kind of indicative that he is going to continue to regress. Isaac Stew's going to get paid as well. Isaac Stew really hasn't fallen at all. He's never been higher than like a 93, 94. So he hasn't regressed yet, but it might happen eventually. This is what the team looks like now going into the 2040 season. My goodness, we are far into the future. This is year 10 of the long-term sim and season 18 overall. We end up winning 89 games and are back in the playoffs for a 16th consecutive season. We don't win the division, though. The Nationals end up taking it home. Here's a look at the numbers. Isaac Stew's numbers took a dip. He also missed a lot of the year. Woody Landry's numbers, though, did not take a dip. He had an unbelievable season. His rating is still going down, but he was unbelievably good here in his age, I think, 36 season. So we're going to play against the Giants here in the first round. We win. Now against the Nationals, we're down 2-1. We win Game 4 and we win Game 5. Now against the Pirates, who have been one of the best teams in the NL, we're down 3-2 and we lose in 6. The Pirates end up defeating the Oakland A's in the World Series. We have not won a championship in, I think, 7 years. It's been a while. In terms of retirements, Jorge Mercedes was with our organization the entire time, had some seasons in the big leagues late. Houston Webster, former Marlins prospect. I wish we stuck it out with him. He was a good player in Minnesota, especially his rookie year. Never really lived up to that, but was a pretty good reliever for them for quite a while. Brian De La Cruz apparently is on the Dodgers, and he's retiring. The plan was for him to retire here, and apparently that's not happening, which kind of sucks. I didn't even know he left. Maybe the game, cut him or something? I don't know. Nonetheless, what a career for Brian De La Cruz. And really looking back at this series, if we look at the best player in this franchise, it's probably going to be one of Woody Landry or Edward Cabrera or someone like that. But my favorite player of this series was honestly Brian De La Cruz. His story throughout this series is without a doubt one of my favorites of any player we've had on this channel. There was probably about 5 different instances where we thought about trading him, and he just kept on giving us reasons to stick around. He made the All-Star team in Season 2, although that offseason was the first time we explored trading him. It was because the Braves gave us a really good offer for Vaughn Grissom, and I thought about it, but I said no. Season 3, again, I really thought about trading him in the Luis Robert trade package, but for whatever reason, we ended up keeping him. From there, he had some good seasons. Year 5, he was really good. We gave him a contract extension. But then Season 6, our first World Series run, he had a pretty bad season. His WAR was negative until September, where he had a really good month and he had a really good playoff run. But at that point, again, I was still planning on trading him that offseason, but then he had the big playoff run. So once again, I decided to keep him. It feels like every year now I had thought about trading him. And then we get into 2029. He gets hurt the second game of the year. But once he comes back in May, he looks dominant. And I had kind of wondered, what if he had been able to stay healthy for the whole year? Could he have been in the running for some big awards? Well, in 2030, that's exactly what happened. He stayed healthy for the whole year and won the MVP. .311 batting average, led the league in average, on base, slugging, OPS, homers, and nearly led in RBIs. He had some good seasons after that, and in his final season, he hit .519, albeit in only 7 games. De La Cruz was also super clutch. He was healthy for 3 Game 7s that we played in this series. We also had another one in 2030, but he was hurt during that playoff run. In all 3 of those Game 7s, he hit home runs. We only went 1 and 2, but he was really good in those games. He was a little bit inconsistent at times in the playoffs, but in the biggest games, he shined. His defense as well was always an interesting story too. At the beginning of this series, it was a running joke that he was so slow reacting to balls in the outfield, and by the time we got to 2028, 2029, 2030, he was one of the best defensive players on the team. His constant improvement was so much fun to watch, despite the fact that we almost traded him 5 separate times. I'm happy we didn't. And again, Brian De La Cruz has got to be my favorite player of this series. I mean, there's a reason why I've spent the last 3 minutes talking about him, whereas every other player I've given like 30 seconds to. Former Marlin Austin Wells retires. Both of the Acuna brothers retired together. That's pretty cool. As Ronald Acuna makes the Hall of Fame along with Brian Reynolds. No De La Cruz, not really a surprise. I mean, he wasn't like a star until he was 33. But still, great career. We ended up paying Omar Nieve, our shortstop, and we signed Steven Quisenberry, who was a guy I wanted to draft a few years back. He was on the Rangers team in 2030, who we beat in the World Series. And then Tobias Starr, former Marlin, ends up signing with Baltimore. So this is what the lineups look like going into the 2041 season as we go 90-72. Another playoff push here for the Marlins. Isaac Stu really did not have that good of a year. We also have plenty of injuries, while Woody Landry is no longer even really good enough to be on the playoff roster. He only hit .232. He had a negative WAR. It seems like we are getting close to the end with Woody Landry, who is no longer the same player he once was at all. Going to play against the Reds in the first round, and we lose as the Diamondbacks beat the Rangers in the World Series. Going into the 2041 offseason, Burt retires along with MJ Melendez, who medically retires with a torn MCL. MJ Melendez is a fun story because he was with the Giants for a while, and in Season 5, he was really good. OPS above 1,100, WAR above 5, even though he only played half the year because he was behind Tyler Stevenson. We traded for him, and that ended up being a great decision. Won the World Series MVP his first year here, had some great playoff runs, and was a really, really good starter for a good 7-8 years. We had some great catching in this series. Nick Fortes, the first 5 seasons, he had some great years, and obviously Melendez as well. Former Marlin Connor Prelup retires. Brandon Clark does as well, another one of our draft picks. I wish we gave him more of the chance. He could have been, I feel like, a fun player. Of course, we had a home run in his first ever at bat. Kurt Kellenberger retires. He wasn't a Marlin, but he was another one of those generational prospects, and unlike Justin Kramer with the Rangers, he never really lived up to it. He was a good player with the Reds and the Tigers, but he's a Hall of Fame talent, and he didn't quite live up to it. Gennaro Miller, the two-way player, retires. He was just never consistent enough as a pitcher or a hitter with us. We traded him to Detroit, and again, he was a solid player, but it was much of the same. He just wasn't really consistent, whether it was as a position player or as a pitcher, but he was still good at both, and he was the Walmart Shohei Ohtani, and he never really got worse as a hitter. I feel like teams still could have used him offensively. Yuri Perez ends up retiring at age 38. Coming into this series, Yuri Perez was the top prospect in our farm system, and he ended up being a bust. His career best ERA was 3.99. We had him for 4 years. It just never worked out. He was a starter for a long time in the big leagues, so for that, he wasn't a total disappointment. But of his prospect pedigree, he was a bust, especially considering in real life how good he is. He's nasty. Joe Shearer retires as well at the age of 40. I feel like when it's all said and done, he's going to be one of the most underrated players of this series. A dominant reliever for us for a long time, whether it was as a long reliever or eventually as a closer. He had some good years afterwards, but never really found a consistent home with the Nationals, White Sox, Nationals again, and the Orioles, retiring at the age of 40. Great, great player, and again, one of the most underrated guys of this entire franchise. To put things in perspective of how far along we are, Joe Shearer was drafted in this series, and he's now 40. Gennaro Miller was 17 the first year. He's now 36. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. ends up making the Hall of Fame just shy of 500 home runs, mainly as a San Francisco Giant. Pedro Chavez's big 7-year, $200 million contract is up. I can't help but feel like he was kind of a disappointment during the contract. A good player, but he was kind of underwhelming. Gus has really regressed hard. He only had 1 year with us. We're going to try to just let him stick around because why not? The team ends up making a big move pitching-wise, though, signing Willie Cisneros to a 6-year deal. Love seeing the team spend money to help the staff, as that's going to bring us into 2042. In terms of guys left, again, it's not really much more than 2 or 3. We're going to try to wide it out with Woody Landry for a little bit longer, but he doesn't have much left in the tank. Isaac Stu is slowing down. Adolfo Jimenez is slowing down, and everybody else is in the minors. We end up going 82-80, and for the first time since 2024, which is nearly 20 years ago, the Marlins are not in the playoffs. Isaac Stu can no longer hit lefties like he once did, although statistically he still had a pretty good year. As for Woody Landry, he must be hiding somewhere. He's in Double-A. He's a 72 overall, and he was I mean, I guess he wasn't awful this past season, but he wasn't, like, all that good. As for the pitching, there you go. And now we'll simulate through the entirety of the playoffs, which we are not participating in, as the Pirates defeat the Athletics again in the World Series. Going into the offseason of 2042, nobody retires from our organization. Former Marlins backup catcher Edgar Caro calls it a career. Ariel Amador retires, the talented shortstop. Amador always kind of had a limited ceiling, but I feel like he never really lived up to the hype with us. It was always injuries with him. It took him 6 years to play 100 games. He was really good in 2032, though. We ended up keeping him around. He didn't play for long after he left us. He was with the Mets and the Dodgers for a little bit. But if we pick the Rockies in MLB 24, I'm confident that we'd be able to get more out of him because he is the best prospect in that system. Ray Parsons, the very first player in this series drafted, he retires. In hindsight, I don't know how he went before Justin Kramer, but he still had a really, really good career in his own right. Now, Kramer has like 3,100 hits at age 35, but not everybody can be Justin Kramer. Dominic Sierra retires. Never really got a chance with us. I wish he did, but unfortunately, that's just how the cookie crumbles. Andres Vina retires as well. It's always a weird strategy picking a reliever in the first round, but he gave us exactly what we could have expected. When I drafted him, I would have hoped for a guy who's going to be a solid reliever in this league for a good 13 years, and he was exactly that. A solid reliever in this league for around 13 years. So we're going to look to bring back Woody Landry, of course, as we enter the year 2043. The team ended up having a rebound year, going 90-72. Despite that, Isaac Stu had probably the worst year of his career. He's only an 82 overall. Woody Landry, meanwhile, is only a 67. He only played in 31 games, but he was actually pretty good. He had over 300. Playing against the Dodgers in the first round, unfortunately we lose, as the Red Sox beat the Giants. Two teams we're considering for MLB 24, battling it out in the World Series. In terms of retirements, we've got another big one. Jesus Sanchez is going to call it a career at age 46. Coming into this series, I was really excited about having Jesus Sanchez because he's another guy we had last year in the Guardians franchise, and he was really good for quite a while. We obviously had him for the full 8 years. We had him for another season as well before he went to Milwaukee. And he honestly had some of his best years with the Brewers. He ended up finishing his career with the Mets before coming back to our farm system for a few years. Really, really good player. Always stepped up in the postseason. And I'm definitely going to miss having him after him being on our team 2 series in a row. Khalil Watson retires as well. He was a really strong player with us and the White Sox. Had a good season as well in San Francisco. Took a little while for him to develop, but once he did, he was really good. Ziggy Zidane also retires. He had some great seasons for us during the long-term sim. I wish we got to use him a little bit more during the actual series. We only had him a little bit there at the end. No Hall of Famers, as that'll bring us into the 2043 offseason. We're going to give Isaac Stu his extension, and that brings us into 2044. Ultimately, the team ended up winning 102 games again, as we end up getting one of the top seeds in the National League and another opportunity to make a big playoff run. We're going against the Nationals, we win. We're going against the Dodgers, we win. And we're back in the World Series against the Oakland A's, and we lose in 5. Unfortunate. That would have been our first World Series in around a decade as well. In terms of retirements, Geronimo Gonzalez calls it a career. To think he was a rookie during the final real season of the series, and now he's 40. I wish we could have had him for longer because he was such a good player. Had a great career with us, had some really good seasons in Pittsburgh, won a Cy Young. We hyped him up a lot coming into the episode, and I really feel like he lived up to it. He was a great player. I wish his career could have lasted a little bit longer, but he was awesome. That brings us into 2045. For what it's worth, last year, Woody Landry was abysmal in the big leagues, negative 2.6 WAR. I think his big league career has unfortunately run its course. Isaac Stu is still a 79 overall, but he's definitely slowing down as well. Another really good season for the team. Isaac Stu had, honestly, a really strong year for the most part, WAR of around 3. We beat the Braves in the first round, lose to the Phillies, unfortunately, and then the Mets end up beating the Yankees in the World Series. Now we are into 2045. The Mora brothers retire. Justin Mora, of course, was with us. And I would argue some of his best seasons were better than Leonardo Mora, but Leonardo always had the better career, which was to be expected. Leonardo Mora, I'm pretty sure, was a top 5 pick, whereas Justin Mora was picked in like the second round. That'll bring us into 2046. Again, pretty strong year. Isaac Stu, though, is down to a 69 overall. He really didn't play that well, and at this point, there's nobody left on the Major League roster who is from the actual series. Now, despite that, we make the World Series here against Toronto. We're down 3-2. We win Game 6. And how about another championship? Our first World Series in 12 years. But finally, we get another ring with Stephen Chang winning the postseason and World Series MVP. You probably have no idea who that is, and that's because I don't either. Into the offseason, Adolfo Jimenez retires. Really good reliever with us for a while. Spent his entire career here. Another guy who I wish we could have had a little bit longer in this series, but he was a really talented player. Ronald Andino retires, our first rounder in Season 2. Never got a full chance to be a starter. Played well in spurts with the Rockies, but just was never all that good and ultimately ended up being kind of a bust. Satchel Aller, we almost drafted him in the first round a few years back. We ended up picking Andres Vina, of course. Robbie Jones retires. He ended up being one of the best players from this series. Had a great career with us. Was really good with the Mariners as well. He never had an ERA in the 4s except for his second year where he pitched like 25 innings. Yuri Perez's best ERA was worse than Robbie Jones's worst ERA of a full season. Just some food for thought. No Hall of Famers in 2046, as that brings us into another offseason. Isaac Stu, of course, is now a 69 overall. Nice. And I think he's maybe got one more Major League season left in the tank until he ultimately chills in the minors with Woody Landry and Edward Cabrera and whoever else we got who's still left. Stu's probably not going to hit 3,000 hits or 600 homers, although he's going to be close, as ultimately Isaac Stu only played 4 games. He's probably not really ever going to be a major leaguer again, as we lose to the Rockies in the first round, and that brings us into another offseason. Still, not many retirements. Gus retires in free agency. We gave him a long deal. He never said yes to it. He just ended up kind of sticking around in free agency. Still a really good player, mostly with the Giants. I'm happy we've got to bring him in for a year, his final season. So technically, he retires as a Marlin. Hitoki Nomo retires as well. He never played during the actual series despite being a Season 2 draft pick. He was always a little inconsistent with us and the Kansas City Royals, but a pretty good player nonetheless. Wade Rockwell retires as well. He was pretty good for a while during the long-term sim with us and the Cubs. Another highly drafted player who I think we got a lot later, like Season 5 or 6. Gus ends up making the Hall of Fame, the very first drafted player of this series into the Hall of Fame, and it's very well deserved. I really wish we could have had Gus for the whole series rather than 1 year, but can't win them all. Now that Isaac Stu is no longer a big leaguer, we're just going to simulate to the end of the season and talk about retirements at this point, since nobody on the team is recognizable anymore. I do want to point out, though, in the 2048 season, we would end up winning the World Series. So in my first year of not really caring at all, we end up winning our 6th World Series championship of the series. Nelson Ling wins the World Series and postseason MVP. Any relations to Benny or Lenny? I don't know. Here we've got 2 big retirements. Edward Cabrera and Isaac Stu retire after the 2048 season. 2 great players. We're going to start things off with Isaac Stu, who was our first round pick in Season 3. We had him for the last 4 seasons of the series, where he was an awesome offensive player. The dude could absolutely mash. In Season 1, as a rookie, solid year, hit the pinch hit home run in Game 7 of the World Series to tie it up before Wander Franco ultimately won the game for the Rays. But he started his career off great. In Season 2, he nearly won the MVP. He won multiple MVPs in 2034 and 2036, and he was a productive player really up until the mid-2040s, where he ultimately fell off and has to medically retire with an ankle injury. Still a really good player. And then that brings us to Edward Cabrera, who I think when it's all said and done, if we disregard the long-term sim, which was a disaster for Cabrera, I feel like he was the best player of the actual series itself. Coming into it, I was excited about his upside. He showed some good flashes in Season 1. In years 2 and 3, he was really good, but then Season 4 onwards, he was the best pitcher in baseball. Season 4, he got robbed for the Cy Young, but luckily for us, he won it the next 4 years, all of which he was signed for a 5-year, $80 million contract. What a bargain! He had basically a Jacob deGrom run as the best pitcher in the league for 5 years. After that, he fell off, and he fell off fast. Was never good in the long-term sim, But in his prime, he was unstoppable. He was great in the playoffs. He was great in the regular season. Whenever we had an Edward Cabrera start, I could pretty much chalk it up as a win because he was that good. By far the best pitcher we've ever had in an MLB The Show series. I don't think his counting stats are going to be good enough to make the Hall of Fame, unlike Isaac Stu, but in his prime, he was legitimately unhittable for 5 years. So shout out Cabrera and Stu, two of the best players of this franchise, and ultimately 2 Marlins make the Hall of Fame. I was excited. I thought they were actually going to get this spot to Cabrera, but it ends up being Isaac Stu, obviously. Very exciting. Our first actual Hall of Famer of this series. And then Ryan Dudek, who played his entire career with the Royals and the Pirates, but his last season he was on our team, so he makes the Hall of Fame as a Marlin. Which, I mean, he doesn't really deserve to, but whatever. So at this point, Woody Landry is really like the only guy left for the most part. If we look at guys who are at least 45, there's only 4 real players left. That includes James Wood and Kevin Alcantara, who I've brought back, and I'm letting them chill on our minor league team. So it's really just Wood, Alcantara, and Woody who are left. In terms of retirement, Pedro Chavez, who we gave that big 7-year deal to, he calls it a career. Pretty good player for 17 major league seasons, but no other super relevant players for us, as Herman Chase makes the Hall of Fame. And to put his career in perspective, he made his debut in 2031, which was the first year of the long-term sim. At this point, there's only 2 real people left in the series, James Wood and Kevin Alcantara. Everybody left is auto-generated. Neither of them or Woody Landry would retire in 2050. That brings us into 2051. The Guardians beat the Reds in the Battle of Ohio in the World Series. The TikTok 12-year-olds are going to have a field day with that one, as James Wood ends up retiring at the age of 49. James Wood is an interesting story because coming into this series, he was a top prospect with the Washington Nationals. He never panned out there. We traded for him as kind of a buy low candidate in Season 5, and he actually ended up being really good, especially the last 2 years. Season 8 in particular, he was awesome, and he was great in the playoffs that year. We gave him the big contract extension, and he never really lived up to it, unfortunately. He went to the Brewers, which, again, them and the Cardinals are where every former Marlin goes. The Brewers would always take all of our former outfielders. They took Luis Robert, they took Jesus Sanchez, and they take James Wood. Justin Kramer ends up retiring as well. He is a 38 overall, but still, without a doubt, the best player of this series. He was one of those generational prospects who was drafted 2nd overall in the very first draft by the Nationals. He was good in his 6 years with Washington. He was never great. Once he signed with the Rangers, though, he was great. He had some ridiculous years. 2035, 49 homers, WAR of 12. He had another year of the WAR of 10. Hitting 45 home runs. In 2040, he hit 51 home runs, batting .344. This guy was a unicorn. I think he had like 3,300 hits, over 600 homers, nearly 2,000 RBIs, and he did it while playing center field with a career WAR over 130. He was honestly better than Mike Trout all time, which says something because Mike Trout is, well, he's Mike Trout. Basically, Justin Kramer is if Mike Trout stayed healthy. Kramer makes the Hall of Fame as a Tampa Bay Ray, and at this point, we're down to 2. Kevin Alcantara and Woody Landry are the 2 oldest players in the save file, and they are the last 2 players left. Once they retire, we'll be all done. Kevin Alcantara retires here the following season in 2052. We traded for Alcantara in Season 1 when he was 21 years old, and now he's 50. So he was really good in 2028, the first year we won the World Series over Minnesota. We gave him a big extension, and again, he was kind of disappointing. He had some good years there, 2034 in particular. His extension wasn't overly pricey, though, so it's not a super big deal, and he ended up spending his entire career with the Marlins. He never played anywhere else, which is pretty cool. Not everybody's been able to say that, but Kevin Alcantara ended up sticking around on the Marlins the entire way. So now in 2052, there's one guy left, and it's Woody Landry, the last man standing. I feel like oftentimes the first player we draft and the face of the series is usually the last guy left. It happened with Louis St. John with the Orioles. It happened with O'Davia Shepherd with the Cavs. Now it's happening with Woody Landry. The thing is, Woody Landry is not looking to retire anytime soon. He did not leave in 2053 or 2054. How about 2055? Nope. He's got to be like 50 at this point. Does he retire in 2056? No. It's been 4 years since anybody of note, being Kevin Alcantara, ended up leaving. How about 2057? Everybody of note in this series is long gone, and half of those guys are probably like dead. Okay, maybe that's mean, but you get the point. Woody Landry still does not retire as Leo Francisco makes the Hall of Fame. How about 2058? It's been 6 years since Kevin Alcantara retired, or in YouTube terms, it's been about a minute. Finally, Woody Landry retires along with some other guys. The game brought back Stephen Chang, one of our 6 World Series MVPs, so that's cool. Woody Landry, of course, won 2 World Series MVPs. Woody Landry was our very first draft pick of the series in 2023, and he made his debut in 2025. He was here for 20 years, and he's been on the minors for like 15 years. Now, unfortunately, the game took out his stats through 2030, which is kind of fitting since 2030 was the last year of the actual series. So they only have his stats for the long-term sim saved. But nonetheless, Woody was a fantastic player. Although his WAR is wrong, his career WAR was more like 60. I don't think it's counting his first 6 years into his WAR. But he was an awesome player for us. Never won an MVP, believe it or not. But he was in the top 3, probably like 4 or 5 times at least. He's been in the organization for the last 13 years, not playing Major League Baseball. He's like the guy at Costco who gets unlimited free samples, and he ends up going back for seconds and thirds and 12ths, as he ends up making the Hall of Fame, of course. And with that, everybody is gone. And to put things in perspective, this guy, Hugo Mora, the oldest player in our organization, would have been 6 years old in the 2023 season when we started, and he would have been 14 years old when we started the long-term sim today. So that brings us here to the end of this series. We ended up with only 2 Hall of Famers, Woody Landry and Isaac Stu, and I guess Bo Bichette, if you want to count him. Also, if you want to count Gus and Ryan Dudek, I mean, you can, but we really only had 2, with Woody Landry and Isaac Stu. But again, I wanted to keep things organic for the long-term sim. We could have kept Woody Landry in the lineup for another 15 years, and he would have had like close to 4,000 hits, maybe 700 home runs. He wouldn't have touched Louis St. John's career numbers, but I suppose he would have been kind of in the ballpark within maybe 1,000. But I think it's more interesting really to keep things a little bit realistic, to really see how these guys would have done if they had a realistic length of an MLB career. And with that, we're done. Here in 2059, nearly 2060, we have made it to the end of the Miami Marlins franchise, and we reflected a little bit at the beginning of the episode, and I guess we're going to do some more reflecting now. This has been an awesome series. Again, one of the best series I've ever done, and one of my favorite series I've ever done, and certainly one of the most influential series for this channel that I've ever done as well. It's been really fun following this journey of 8 seasons. We really had 2 or 3 different roster cores, but we were able to maintain a lot of the core guys. As I mentioned, our Marlin lifers, Edward Cabrera, Woody Landry, Isaac Stu, Jazz Chisholm, Brian De La Cruz, and a bunch of other guys. It was really fun to see their developments and their stories throughout this series. And then today, it was really fun to see how their careers unfolded, and we got to give everybody their flowers as they retired. There were a couple guys I forgot. I want to apologize to Jacob Berry and Tyrell Berry because I must have skipped over them in their retirements. So sorry to the Berries that we didn't really get to highlight your careers. Nick Fortes as well is another one I wish I could have seen and gone over. There's probably a few other guys as well who I didn't even mention who I wish I went over. But nonetheless, super fun series. It's been an absolute blast. I'm really excited for MLB The Show 24. I'm excited for you guys to find out the team I'm choosing within the next couple of days. Normally at this point, I know the team I'm picking. I have everything beginning to be planned out. But believe it or not, I still have not decided. And the game comes out in like 3 days. The team reveal is going to be in like a day or 2. So I'm hopefully going to decide the team we're picking within the next 24 hours. It's been without a doubt the hardest team selection I've ever done on a series, regardless of game. It's also the most time I've ever put into a team selection. I've been going on like fan graphs, looking at all these teams, looking at their projections and their farm systems and all that. So just know there's been a ton of time and effort and thought put into this decision, and hopefully once I decide officially within the next 24 hours, I'll be able to get the team reveal together, and hopefully you guys are going to be excited with the team I ultimately choose. So that's going to wrap it up here. This series, again, has been an absolute pleasure, one of my favorites all time in the history of this channel. And for the final time in the Miami Marlins franchise here on MLB The Show 23, I hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out. Go Marlins.